Well, Happy New Year, everyone. Glad you're here. If you're a guest with us today, in a couple weeks, we're going to go into a deep Bible study called the Book of Colossians. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but we're not afraid of going into the Bible, going deep, seeing what it has to say to us. And in a couple weeks, we're going to do that. Today, I'm more theme related, and I'll explain why here in a moment. Over Christmas holiday, I got to go skiing with a big group of my family. My one daughter was missing, but outside of that, it was my two sons and their families, and my daughter and her husband, and then two of my granddaughters now ski. And so it was a great day up in Michigan. But my sons, my son-in-law and my daughter, they wanted to break away from the little girls, so we left those with Bonnie for a little bit, doing the slow slopes, and they wanted to work themselves over to this big mountain. I told them, I said, I do not want to get hurt. Don't let me get hurt. But they kept moving me back, and we kept getting on the next ski lift, and next thing I knew, I was at the top of the high point there, looking right down a black diamond. A black diamond, that's the steepest that they have. And I was upset. I did not want to do it, but I know how to ski, so you know what? If I just take my time and make great big turns, I'll go down nice and slow and carefully. And I was just about to go off the edge when my daughter yelled to my son-in-law and my two sons, "Last one to tag dad is a loser." And I turned around, and they just immediately started pushing, coming right at, and I'm like, I got to get out of here. I went over the edge, and I was making my big turns, but I could hear my son-in-law behind me, and I looked over to my left, and there was Matthew, who was closing the gap on me this way, and I looked over here, and there's Mark closing the gap, and now I can't make my big turns that I want, so the turns get more and more narrow, and if you know anything about skiing, that starts picking up speed. I was going so fast, tears were coming out of my eyes. It was from the wind, believe me. And it looked like calf lassoing in a rodeo is what they were trying to bring me in. And no sooner did they have me too tight and a little out of control, Mark tagged me so hard he tipped me over. And now I'm just spinning legs and arms and skis out of control down, and I get all the way to the bottom of the hill where I finally come into a stop, looking up at the sky, and I was just evaluating my life. Why did I have children? Why am I doing this? About that time, some kid I didn't know, like 10 years old, came skiing up to me and stopped, and he said, "Are you okay, mister?" Mister? When did I become a mister? If it would have been a young guy, he'd have been like, "Dude, that was odd." But no, "Are you okay, mister? Can I get your walker for you?" And it's just, and then I said, "Move on, move on. Nobody likes you. Move on." I didn't say that. And it was just one of those amazing moments where I realized that I'm old and I can get hurt quickly. I want to talk to you a little bit about tipping points. Tipping points. There's probably a tipping point in your life. There's probably something that can just push you a little too far. Buildings have tipping points. If I asked you to imagine a tipping building, we'd probably all come to the same conclusion. Leaning Tower of Pisa is usually what comes to mind first. This tower has been leaning for 800 years, and it's constantly under threat. They're constantly watching it. They put $30 million into trying to straighten it a little bit. $30 million trying to straighten it. They only gained a few centimeters. And the $30 million they spent on that this last year was lost. It's now tipping again. That thing's going to come down unless somebody makes some changes and corrects it. So they're constantly watching the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Also, this last year, they announced that Big Ben is now leaning. Big Ben now, by the officials, is 17 inches out of plumb. And they're starting to show cracks inside the building, cracks in the ceiling, cracks on the walls, and this thing is starting to go. And they know that if they don't make some changes here, that thing is going to eventually fall down. That's what they know. So now the UK is scrambling to get that fixed. Right here in Lincoln, we have our own leaning building. Hey, yeah, some of you are like, I know where that's at. So just outside of Lincoln is this barn. Okay, everyone keeps correcting me. It's a corn crib. It's a barn. Get over it, all right? And in the late 1960s, there was this flood, And the flood fractured the foundation, and that thing started to sink and lean. And I was told this morning, by one of our old timers, that thing's not going anywhere. You know what? If something doesn't correct it, the next wind, the next flood, eventually is going to pull that thing down, because everything begins to deteriorate and fall. Why talk about tipping points this morning? I wonder if our church is on a tipping point. There's positive tipping points and negative tipping points. A negative tipping point, you all know this. Every year, 5,000 churches close their doors to never open again. 5,000 churches. They decline and decline and decline until there's only 15, 10 people left. They're all elderly. There's no youth, nothing for the future, and they eventually can't afford the bills, and they close their doors. There's been a few churches in town here that have closed their doors through the years. Those are negative tipping points. Somewhere long before the death of that church, the church started tipping, and they didn't recognize that it was tipping, and they didn't make the changes necessary to correct it. They were afraid of change, and so they didn't make the changes. There's also positive tipping points where you recognize that something is tipping, and you make changes which tips it back into your favor. It tips it into a better direction. And I'm wondering if Lincoln Christian Church might be on one of those tipping points. You see 700, 800 people here on Sunday morning. You're like, oh, no, this church is going to be here forever. Let me tell you something. For the last 3 years, we've been slowly declining. Our average attendance has slowly been coming down. Now, I don't think death is just around the corner, but is this the beginning of a tipping point where we should be making some changes in ourselves and in our ministry that would affect it the other direction? Is there something we should do that maybe would bring the attendance up here a little bit? And that's the question I'm asking. Why are the attendance numbers coming down? We grow people every year. There was baptisms last year and new commitments to Christ. They will be this year. We had people transfer into this membership from other communities. That same thing will happen this year. We show growth every year, but it's not enough to offset the negative losses. Why are we losing people? Well, people move away sometimes. People die. We've had a lot of people here from our church that have died. Not during the service, so relax, but it happens. And we've had people relocate. We're in a declining community. Lincoln, the whole city of Lincoln is declining in numbers and population. And businesses have been lost. And because of some of those closed businesses, it has caused some people to be relocated, and so they've had to leave. We've had people go to other ministries. That happens all the time here in this town. A lot of people jump from ministry to ministry to ministry, and because of a need, because of something in their life, maybe it's a family need, maybe it's a youth ministry or children's ministry need, and they love their small church that they were involved in, but now they're looking out for what's spiritually best for their kids, and so they'll sometimes come here. And then we've had people retire who have moved to be closer to grandkids. I don't fault anybody for that decision. I completely understand wanting to be close to grandkids. But I even have people who told me today, one day when I reach retirement, we are going to move and be closer to grandkids. And they are people who have been in this church for eons. They raised their kids in this church. They've been a part of this ministry for many, many years. But their kids didn't come back to this area. Now their kids live in other states, and they're going to, when they retire, they're going to go be closer to their grandkids. And that's a good call for them. But it affects the ministry here. So the numbers are starting to come down a little bit. Just being transparent with you. What's the answer to those coming down? Oh, and nationally, the church is bleeding, by the way. If you didn't know it, the church overall is declining in its numbers, declining in its influence in our world. For the last 12 years, the Southern Baptists have given numbers that show a decline every year in their denomination. Do you want to know what number's up in America? Here's the number that's up. People who have no affiliation with Christ or church in any way is just starting to climb and climb and climb. that's not the nation we were when I grew up. And yet, this is happening, and churches who see this happening make some changes that are necessary in order to keep it from happening. And I'm wondering what we can do to turn a tipping point into a turning point for us. Is there some changes we need to make? Now, everyone relax for a moment. I'm not about to unveil some drastic change that's going to shock the whole church. That's not what I'm doing today. Are changes on their way? Yes. In the next few weeks, you're going to start seeing some of the brick and some of the facade in here that's going to change the look of our staging. That's all starting to come. In the next month or 6 weeks, you're going to see an entire change to our children's ministry entrance. And we're very excited about those changes coming. We believe they will make us more welcome ready. We believe they will help us in our outreach. It's all part of our 10,000 reasons that we're trying to reach out to. But there's some changes coming. But there are churches who didn't make changes. At pivotal points, at tipping points in their ministry, they didn't make the changes necessary to keep bringing in the younger family. For instance, contemporary worship. This contemporary worship style that you're in today has only been with us right around 20 years, I believe it is, maybe a little over 20 years. It was a group of some really cool people who said, you know what, traditional service is awesome, we love it, but we think there's a need for contemporary worship, and they had a big heart for reaching out and ministering in that way, and so volunteers, they weren't paid staff, they didn't get paid for it, just out of their heart. They came over here into this setting, and they started a contemporary worship service. And right at first, a contemporary worship service was smaller than the traditional. But over time, 75% of our people now choose a traditional setting. That's why we have 3 services over here. We're not going to do away with the traditional service. That's not what I'm saying. There's still a big need for the traditional service. 170 people attend that service, But this change needed to happen. Not every church made that change at the right time. Some of them held on to just a one-format worship program, and it didn't serve them well. Change is sometimes difficult. Change isn't always comfortable. I was going to go home to my parents. This was a few years back when my dad was still alive, and it was just going to be me. I was just traveling home by myself, and me and my parents. And my mom's like, is there something special you would like, You're coming home. Is there anything special you'd like? And I don't know why, but just on a whim, I said, yeah, you know what? I'd like some Wheaties cereal for breakfast. If I'm going to go back and if I'm going to be nostalgic and kind of capture some of my time from my childhood, I thought it'd be cool to sit there with my parents again and just have a bowl of Wheaties. And so my mom's like, well, if that's what you want. And so, my dad got bacon and eggs that morning. But anyway, so there I am sitting there with my parents. Same table I grew up at, same parents, same house. But it was different. I didn't recapture that childhood moment. And it had to do with the Wheaties box. Hank Aaron was no longer on the front of the Wheaties box. And that drove me crazy, all right? I mean, it was Tiger Woods, and he's phenomenal, great athlete. But I was like, where's Hank Aaron? I want Hank Aaron on the front. And it just didn't feel the same. Wheaties recognized a long, long time ago that they need to make some changes along the way. The product hasn't changed, but the boxing has changed. I grew up with Kentucky Fried Chicken. There are young people in this room, until I mentioned it, you did not know that KFC stood for Kentucky Fried Chicken. But a long time ago, they discovered that fried foods aren't popular, so they had to get fried foods out of their name. So they just moved it over to KFC. KFC, we know better. It's fried, and it's awesome. I grew up with sugar frosted flakes, but sugar became unpopular. Got to get sugar out of the name, so now it's just called Frosted Flakes. They're great. There's sugar all over that thing, and it is awesome. Change had to come about. Change had to be made. And there's some changes here at Lincoln Christian Church that need to be made. And it is not all about our facility. It's not all about our methods. See, here's what happens. When you change a method of ministry, some people automatically conclude that that's a change in the message. Even when we changed styles of worship, we didn't change the message. The message here is still the same. You need Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the only way to God. John 14:6. We believe in the authority of the Scripture. See, the message here hasn't changed. The method has changed, but not the message. The product is still the same, but the outside of the box might look a little different. But there's another change I'm asking for this next year. We had a 10,000 Reasons generosity campaign to raise the funds to change the facility to make it more welcoming. Now I'm asking you to change your heart to reach out to the 10,000 people. I'm asking us to become evangelists. The word evangelism can be a really, really churchy word that turns off a lot of people. I'm not the one who came up with this. I'm not the one who said, go out and make disciples everywhere you go. That wasn't me who said it, it was Jesus. It was Jesus in John chapter 15, verse 5, who said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. You will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing, he said. And so what I'm wondering is, what would it take for you and I for this next year, for 1 year, to turn our hearts to reaching out to the 10,000 and trying to get them connected to God, trying to get them connected to Jesus, trying to get them connected to a community of faith, a church? What would it take? What changes would have to happen in your life for you to accept a call like that? And right now, as I'm saying, you're like, oh, it is so wrong to try to proselytize somebody today. You know, that's viewed as so negative. Yeah, that's what the world is telling us, and that's what the message Satan wanted us to hear, but it is not what God said. God commanded that you and I go and do this. And so there are 10,000 reasons in our community, 10,000 hurt, bruised, battered people, 10,000 who need Jesus Christ. Why do they need him? Because in him is where there's life. Jesus said, I've come that they might have life and have it abundantly. Uh-oh. What's the opposite of life? Death. Did you know every time God talks about an unbeliever, he uses terms like blind, darkness, death, dead in their sins? Did you know that? When God sees an unbeliever, he sees someone as lost. In Jesus we're found. In Jesus we have light. In Jesus we see clearly. Our blindness has been removed. In Jesus we receive life. And here's what's going on in our churches today is we start viewing everybody as, you know what, everybody's basically good, and so most of them will probably go to heaven. Instead of seeing people the way God sees them, a very clear line of believer and unbeliever. Lost, saved, darkness, light, life, death. So here's what we're going to do. I'm not trying to unleash another program, but here's what we're going to do real quick. Number one, I need you to start praying for somebody that you're thinking of right now. There's somebody in your life that you need to start praying that God will open up their heart and open up a door for you to talk to them about Jesus Christ. Jesus said the Spirit is the one that gives life, and if he said you can do nothing without me, we shouldn't even try to do any evangelism until we start praying first. And so we need to pray. If God said, okay, here's what your call is. I want you to go to the cemetery and I want you to raise a person from the dead. Not a mass revival. You don't have to raise 10 or 20. Just raise one person from the dead. If that were your calling and you were standing in a cemetery, let me ask you, how important would prayer be to you in that moment? Pretty important. How important would it be that you tap into the Holy Spirit to help this thing to happen? Pretty important. Same thing is true in evangelism. We often try to do evangelism on our own effort, and we're not including the Spirit in that. And so number one, you're going to start praying. Number two, you're going to become friendly. You're just going to make a friendship. You know, that friendship may be nothing more than a hospitality to your home, maybe an invite to dinner, a picnic. Maybe you don't even bring up spiritual things at the beginning. You're just creating a friendship. With social media, problems today. People are void of community. They're missing out on friendships, and they're dying for a friend. And before you get too nervous, my goodness, Ron, the 10,000 reasons we have, man, some of them live some really, really shady lives. Those are, really, I need to become friends with that? That sounds like something from my childhood. Be careful of the group you're seen with. You know, you'll be viewed as one of them if you hang out with the wrong group. Birds of a feather flock together, grandparents used to say. You know, good morals are corrupted by bad company. You know, if we're talking about our children, yeah, that's probably good and wise teaching. But I'm not talking to the children. I'm talking to us adults. And if you want to walk the same walk that Jesus walked, Jesus was accused of being a friend of sinners. He's a friend of sinners. Look at him. Friendship. Then also, number 3 is an invite. It's just a simple invite. Maybe you invite them to a program here at the church, or an event, or a luncheon, or a dinner, or whatever. Maybe you invite them to church. Invites are fine. God uses invites. Our staff is all committed this next year to an invite of one of our 10,000. My wife and I are working on an invite to some people from our 10,000 reasons. The elders are all on board. We're all going to be looking for an opportunity to extend an invite. But don't think the invite is the end, because if the invite is all about connecting them to a church and not connecting them to Jesus, we haven't fulfilled evangelism. Which brings me to number 4 then, see them all the way to Jesus. And that's true discipleship. Everything that's on there, prayer, friendship, invitations, and leading people to Jesus, this is the DNA of God. This is what he's made out of. This is deep inside his heart. And when you and I became his children, he put that DNA in us. There's someone right now you're thinking of. God has already put somebody on your mind. It might be a person who has fallen away from church. It might be a person who has fallen away from God. It might be someone who calls themselves an atheist. It might be somebody who's so far from God, you can't even imagine that they would ever be open to Jesus. And right now, that person is right in your face. You can see them clearly. And maybe, just maybe, God has maneuvered that person close to you, and he's waiting for you to ask the Spirit to help you move that person closer to Jesus. Maybe. How valuable is a human soul to you? 1988, we had these 3 whales icebound up off of Alaska, Barrow, Alaska. They were in the last breathing hole. All the water had frozen shut rapidly. It was one of those harsh, fast winters. And they found themselves in one of the last breathing holes. And some locals found them, and they were bleeding. They were cut from the ice. They were battered. They were fatigued and tired. And they were barely staying alive in this little tiny hole, taking turns getting breaths. And the open water already at that point was some 10 miles away. The locals, man, they ran out there real quick. They cut this hole, made it a little bigger so they could all breathe at the same time. But this moment went out across the world. Across the world, the whole world were watching these 3 whales. And how are we ever going to get them to open water? How are we going to rescue these whales? And it was such a huge heart passion, and money started flying in. And then other countries got involved. China sent some ice cutting tools there. Russia sent their ice breakers, which started to break ice, but they could only come up about 5 miles away. They closed 5 miles of ice, broke it all up, but open water was still 5 miles away from this hole. So what did everybody do? I mean, people were flying in. I'll do whatever it takes to save these whales. They started cutting a series of holes, every 20 yards apart, a series of holes for 5 miles. They did this. And then they moved the whales by slapping the water and coaxing them from hole to hole. They slowly moved them until they finally reached open water. The problem is that when they first started, too far away for a whale to hold his breath, one of the whales slipped away out of sight. They lost one. Everybody knows he died, and the tears flew, and Listen, I am not against saving whales. That's not the point I'm trying to make. We get so passionate about saving whales. I'm just asking if you have the same passion for a human soul. That's all I want. I want to have that same passion for a human soul. This was so important to Jesus that he looked at his followers and he said this, I will make you fishers of men. You don't have to worry about becoming an evangelist. You don't have to stress over how you're going to do this. Jesus said, I will make you one of these. You will become a fisher of men. And what I'd love to do this next year is turn a tipping point that I'm seeing as a negative right now into a tipping point that's positive. There is an empty seat somewhere close to you. And I'm wondering if you would commit to inviting somebody and putting them in that seat this year. This is going to be your year of evangelism, and the person that came to mind you're going to work with. It's a very, very exciting time. Lincoln is our pond, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we fish. You don't have to worry about tangling lines with other fishermen because guess what? There's not that many people out there fishing. Churches often swap sheep with one another and they call that growth. And I've done the same. I don't want sheep from other folds. I want to see a true unbeliever become a believer. And so my wife and I have committed our lives. We're involved in a couple that I would say are from the 10,000 Reasons. I'm asking my staff to do the same, and they've committed to it. I'm asking the elders to do the same, and they've committed to it. And so now it all comes down to you.